Hey everybody, have we got a good head-to-head for you today? Behind me are two super duper sedans. And I say that because they're both limousines, they both start at over $100,000, and they both make more than 500 horsepower. Now, obviously, cars that are this expensive can only be bought by very, very wealthy people. Call them one percenters, call them whatever you want. But here's the thing, these cars exist, those kinds of customers exist, so we have to help the discerning oligarch figure out which one of these Gangnam-style luxury assault yachts is the best one. These cars are very similar. They both start out as the full-size luxury offering from their respective manufacturers. In the case of the Audi, it starts life as an A8. In the case of the Alpina, it starts life as a BMW 7 Series. But then they get tuned. The result is, both of these cars have relatively small displacement twin-turbo V8s and 8-speed ZF-sourced automatic transmissions. From there, things go a little bit different, whereas the Audi has the brand's standard corporate quattro all-wheel drive system, and this particular Alpina B7 is rear-wheel drive only, although all-wheel drive is an option, as is a long wheelbase. With the Audi S8, it's short wheelbase only. Let's start by taking a look at the Audi. Now, it has a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that's shared with the S6, the S7, and the Bentley Continental GT V8. The Audi makes more horsepower than the Bentley, which I think is crazy. Audi's claiming 520 horsepower. For the Alpina, it's a similar story. That twin-turbo 4.4-liter V8 starts out making 450 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque when it's in the 2013 BMW 750i. However, Alpina tunes it like crazy. The result is it makes 540 horsepower. Now you might be saying, well, hey, the M5 makes 560 horsepower, to which I would answer, but the Alpina makes 538 pound-feet of torque. Again, the M5 only makes 500. So it's quite a car. And again, it's rear-wheel drive, which means it's probably gonna have a little bit better steering than the Audi, and there's something else. Okay, so this is under the matte purple hood of the Alpina B7, and what I want to show you is this. Right where my arm is, if you continue that line out, that's the center line of the wheels. And as you can see, most of the block, most of the engine is actually behind the center point of the wheels. And that's good because it makes the car more mid-engine than not. Now obviously, it's a front-engine car, but all that weight is tucked back against the firewall, back behind where the wheels are doing the turning, and that makes the car kind of more eager and better handling. And I want to compare this to the Audi. Boom! That right there is the center line of the wheels. And that means that this big twin-turbo V8 motor is slung all the way in front of the half shafts. It means that this car has a bunch of extra weight hanging off the nose that the Alpina simply doesn't have. What's the problem with weight in front of the wheels like that? Well, it's going to push more and it's going to be less eager to turn. Now, maybe Audi pulled a Porsche and they took a bad design and they engineered it really well, but I'm thinking that dynamically, the Alpina is going to have the upper hand. Let's start with the matte purple microcar eater. The BMW Alpina B7 hits 60 miles per hour in 4.3 seconds. That's pretty quick for a 4,700 pound car. The B7 then runs the quarter mile in 12.6 seconds at 113.6 miles per hour. Again, respectable. And now, here's the Audi S8, which remember is down 20 horsepower and almost 60 pound-feet of torque compared to the Alpina. It takes 3.5 seconds to hit 60 miles an hour, and then it runs the quarter mile in an incredible 11.8 seconds at a smoking 118.3 miles per hour. What is going on here? To find out, we brought both limos down to K&N and strapped them to the dyno. Here's a Cliff Notes version of how that works. A dynometer shows you the amount of power a car makes at the wheels. This is different from the advertised crank horsepower. The quick and dirty rule of thumb for dynos is that a rear-wheel drive car with independent suspension suffers a drivetrain loss of 15%. For an all-wheel drive car, the estimate is about 20%. So, if the Quattro Audi puts down 100 horsepower at the wheels, the engine is actually cranking out 120 horsepower. Again, these are rough but educated estimates. Got it? Well, the Audi spun 479 horsepower and 422 pound-feet of torque, which, if you factor in a 20% loss rate, is actually 575 horsepower and 506 pound-feet of torque. Translation? Not only is this car underrated, it's an absolute monster. The Alpina is a different story. It put down 414 horsepower and 437 pound-feet of torque, and at a 15% loss rate, that's 476 horsepower and 503 pound-feet of torque, considerably less than advertised. And if we go ahead and assume the same power loss as the all-wheel drive Audi, those numbers are still less than the 540 ponies and 538 pound-feet of torque that BMW claims. Calculating for a 20% loss, the B7 makes 497 horsepower and 524 pound-feet of twisting force. Go figure. So here we are in the Alpina B7, and the first thing I want to point out is I finally found a car color that matches my shirt. The next thing is, you look around the interior and Alpina hasn't done much. I mean, they have a new steering wheel on here and they seem to have gauges that match the body color, but otherwise it's sort of your luxury cocoon fortress of solitude, just like any other 7 Series, which for a high performance car maybe is a little too isolated. The next thing you notice is how poor the throttle response is, and this was everyone who drove the car. This was their number one complaint, is that you enter a corner, you're at the apex, you hit the throttle, and you wait, and it's like they solved turbo lag with the engine, but they felt bad about solving it, so they reintroduced lag with the throttle pedal. And it's a real shame because BMW's traditionally been known for their great throttle response, and this is sort of a brand betrayal. The second thing that we don't like about the B7 is that on a twisty, fun road like this, it feels big and heavy. Now you might say, well, Johnny, it is big and heavy. To which I would say, yeah, but so's the Audi. In fact, there's less than 100 pounds of difference between those two cars, yet the Audi feels like a sports sedan, whereas this always feels like a luxury barge. So here we are in the Audi S8, and right off the bat, there are 2 things I do not like about this car. Number 1 is the steering. It's your typical Audi numb steering. Now, it does at least have 2 modes. It has comfort and dynamic, neither of which is any good. Comfort is way over boosted, and dynamic, okay, it's heavier, but it's still numb, and it's just, you're moving the wheel and the car's going where you're pointing it, but you just feel detached. And that's true of all Audis, and this one is no different. The other thing I'm not a big fan of is the brake pedal feel. And what I mean by that is you got to go through half the pedal before you start to get the brakes. The brakes themselves are great. They work wonderfully. It's just that they don't engage right away. And for a car that is as fast as this thing is, and we know how fast it is, you want the engagement of the brakes to be right at the top of the pedal. And this one, you kind of got to move it too much. Aside from that, this car is fantastic. I am absolutely in love with the S8. Whereas the Alpina always felt big and heavy on windy, twisty roads, not this one. It shrink wraps around you. It feels like a sports car, and yet it's a 4,600-pound limousine. I'm having a hard time overstating how great this car is, and it's one of the very best cars I've driven, maybe since we did Best Driver's Car. I mean, it is utterly fantastic. It's one of those cars, and if you've ever driven a really good car, you'll know what I'm talking about, but after rolling about 10 feet at parking lot speeds, I was just struck by the notion, by the feeling, by the sensation that I was driving something really special. And it just is. I mean, Audi has done such a great job with the S8. I'm just flabbergasted by how good it is. And look, I've taken a lot of grief about saying not so nice things about Audis from time to time, usually pointing out how they're kind of front-wheel drive biased and everyone else in the segment's rear-wheel drive. I take it all back. This car, the Audi S8, is so good, call me an Audi fanboy, because now I am. So, the big takeaway here is this. Each of these two super duper sedans are fast and luxurious. And while one is spooky fast, we seriously doubt that the people who can and will purchase these cars spend a bunch of time waiting on Christmas trees at drag strips. These are, after all, limousines. However, one of them is able to transcend its limo-ness and become an excellent driver's car. And that's the Audi S8. Hey, it's cheaper too.